expert commentators. We start with Dr. Sharda ma'am. She's dear to us and needs no introduction. Dr. Ruma Rai, senior consultant and teacher of teachers. Dr. Mitra Saxena. Dr. Mitra Saxena is a very famous gynecologist from Rewari. She is North Zone Coordinator, Ethics and Medical Legal Committee for 21-22, and also the North Zone Coordinator for Breast Committee. In addition, she's been the past president for Rewari Obstetrics and Gynecological Society. Welcome, Dr. Mitra Saxena. And then we have Dr. Meenakshi Ahuja. She's a little late, but she'll be joining us soon. Dr. Meenakshi is the clinical coordinator of PAN-DGF, and Dr. Kishore Rajurkar, I hope he's there. Dr. Sahab, good evening. I'm sure he must be on his way. Dr. Kishore is the president, Outer Delhi Gynae Forum. So welcome to each one of you, and I request, I will invite Dr. Aparna, our speaker for the show. I think one of our most loved speakers at Delhi Gynae Forum East. She will be speaking on disseminated intravascular coagulation. Welcome, Dr. Aparna. Dr. Aparna is from AIIMS and very, very popular, very, very well read, and a great academician.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good evening to all of you.
One sentence. She's a great human being also.
Of course. Of course. And that Chada ma'am is so fond of her, goes without saying.
I'm fond of her. I'm very public about it. Very public about it, and I'm fond of her. And secondly is that she's going to teach on the topic which Dr. Jyoti is also very fond of, an expert on it, and she would say DIC means death is coming. So yes, we are waiting to hear from you. How this death can be averted.
Right. So a very good evening to all of you. And as usual, ma'am, Sharda Jain ma'am, it's really my honor to be here today talking in front of my favorite people. And time and again, I come and speak in front of the Delhi Gynae Forum East. And it's always a pleasure to be here and talking about new things, different topics. So today I'm going to talk about DIC. So when I talk about DIC, I think DIC is every obstetrician's nightmare. And it goes without saying that it is a multidisciplinary management to begin with, and it ends with the multidisciplinary management. And as you know, I'm also starting with the same comment that death is coming. So I think once DIC sets in, we are kind of, all of us are shocked that, okay, now what? So it is all about prevention, but at the same time, it is about management as well. But I'm very fond of, talking about the basics. So, what really happens behind DIC, it is something that we really need to understand. So I'll just take some time on physiology of hemostasis and why DIC happens and what happens in DIC that makes it so life-threatening. So what normally happens when there is a wound is there is a break in vessels, and there is something called a primary hemostasis, which is like the initial hemostasis. This is followed by a coagulation, wound sealing, and which is the coagulation is the second step, which makes the clot stronger. This is followed by the clot lysis, which is the fibrinolysis or clot destruction. So these three things have to happen one after the other. And when these three things happen one after the other in balance, our system remains normal. So there are three steps to hemostasis. One is the primary hemostasis, which is essentially platelet driven. The second is the coagulation, which is driven by the coagulation factors and inhibitors. And the third part is fibrinolysis, which is driven by the fibrinolytic activators and inhibitors. And there is such a fine balance between all three that only then everything is normal, and anything goes wrong, all of it goes haywire. Normally, this part is the vessel wall, where there is an endothelium which is inside, and there is a subendothelium which is outside, and there is the tissue. So all of this on the right side, if you see, everything is hunky-dory, there is no problem. But the moment there is a damage, there is a vessel wall damage, the green things which are coming in are the platelet, and the yellow things are the coagulation factors. So with the endothelial cell damage, there is platelet adhesion, exposure of subendothelium, and that triggers the endothelial injury that triggers the platelet pathway, that triggers the endothelial pathway. So that is one mechanism of injury that happens. Now, in the primary hemostasis, the first step to hemostasis is to clog the damaged vessels. And this is the first step to hemostasis. And this is something like bricks without cement. These are not very strong. These are essentially formed by the platelet. So the small figure here is the inactivated platelet. And this is the activated platelet. And here it is being held by the von Willebrand factor and even fibrinogen. So this is the first step of wound hemostasis. Now the next step and the most important step is to strengthen the platelet clot which has come, and that is the coagulation pathway which starts coming into action. And we all know that the traditional name of these factors were these, and we know them as factor 1 to 13. But what is important, what we need to know is factor 1 and factor 2. Ultimately, what we need is fibrin, which is the factor 1, and thrombin, which is the factor 2. So thrombin is precursor to fibrin. So thrombin is needed to convert fibrinogen. Fibrin is the one which is making the clot. So this is very, very important to remember. So factor 1 and factor 2. And we know that hemophilia is factor 8 and factor 9. So we know that these are anti-hemophilic factors. And factor 10 is the Stewart factor that we had studied. What is actually happening that coagulation is a balance, because for thrombin to get activated, there are procoagulant factors, which are these, the factor 2, 7, 9, and 10. And there are anticoagulant factors also, which are the tissue factor pathway inhibitors, protein C, protein S, and antithrombin. The balance between the two will determine whether there is procoagulation or there is anticoagulation. So these are some of the basics. And why I have shown you this pathway is very, very simple. Some things that we need to remember, because this will explain why DIC is happening. Now, there is something called the intrinsic pathway and something called the extrinsic pathway. Now, this tissue factor pathway or the extrinsic pathway gets activated when there is something coming from outside, like retained products, retained tissues, fetal death, after fetal death. So this is activating the extrinsic pathway, while a damaged surface will activate the intrinsic pathway. So either way, your coagulation pathway gets activated. And what is the end point here that we are looking at is thrombin, whether factor 7 is activating, which is the extrinsic pathway, or factor 8, 9, 11, and 12 are intrinsic factor pathway. The end result that is leading to is factor 2 and eventually factor 1, which is leading to the coagulation. So it is very important to test here and remember that ET based, the prothrombin time will tell you about the extrinsic factor and the common pathway, and the APTT test will tell you about the intrinsic pathway or the factors 9, 11, and 12. So this is the basics what we had read in MBBS, but it is still very, very useful when you are actually trying to understand what is happening. Because one simple thing about DIC is everything is deranged, whether it is a PT-based pathway or an APTT-based pathway. Any liver disorder, you have this extrinsic factor which is troubled. So this is a factor 7 which is a problem. So this basic understanding will be very helpful in going forward. So how fibrin is formed? Thrombin is actually from fibrin monomers, the fibrin polymers are formed, and fibrin cross-linking is happening because of factor 13. Interestingly, we had a patient of factor 13 deficiency who was having menorrhagia, then ovarian cyst, and then multiple. So factor 13 comes at play at the last point after the fibrin has formed to cause the fibrin cross-linking. So this is your basic structure. Fibrin has formed, and then what happens? The next step is that the fibrin has to get lysed. And for this, we need plasmin. This is the step which is very important, because a clot once formed cannot stay in that vessel forever. Otherwise, there will be thrombosis. So the lysis of fibrin is as important as formation of fibrin. So this is where the plasmin comes in. But with the lysis comes the side effects of lysis, which is the fibrin degradation products and D-dimer. And this is what we are measuring in DIC. So this is a very important concept that once we have fibrin, it has to get lysed. How does it get lysed? It gets lysed by plasmin. And if there is adequate lysis, if there is excessive lysis, there will be fibrin degradation products and D-dimers, which are measured by the in the DIC, which is increased. So fibrinolysis releases D-dimers. If D-dimers are present, fibrin has been formed and is being lysed, depending on the measurement. And if the D-dimer level is normal, then in that case, there is no lysis which is happening. So now, after these basics, I will come to what is DIC. Now, DIC, because of various methodologies, there is massive activation of the coagulation, whether it is an intrinsic pathway, which we had seen, or the extrinsic. For whatever reason, your entire coagulation pathway is becoming excited, is becoming activated. Now, this will lead to consumption of clotting factors. So, paradoxical situation in which there is both clotting and bleeding, and it is both from the diagnostic and therapeutic point of view. So to define DIC, it is an acquired syndrome characterized by intravascular activation of coagulation with loss of localization. It could be because of different causes, and it can originate from and cause damage to microvasculature. And if it is sufficiently severe, it can cause organ dysfunction. And in obstetrics, what are we worried about? Placental abruption, preeclampsia, amniotic fluid embolism. So, and of course, when you have excessive PPH and blood loss. So these are the common conditions which are associated with DIC, and in obstetrics, it can lead to mortality. So we are really, really worried about it. So what is happening in DIC? Now we very well saw that underlying disorder, systemic activation of coagulation, widespread fibrin deposition, because we realized the point of coagulation is fibrin. Now this fibrin has to get deposited everywhere. This will lead to thrombosis. Thrombosis will lead to organ failure. At the same time, how is fibrin formed? We need coagulation factors. These coagulation are going and unnecessarily forming fibrin, so they are unable to do the other important work. So there is excessive bleeding. So it's a thrombohemorrhagic disorder. Uncontrolled thrombin generation, fibrin deposition, leading to multiple organ failure. Then secondary fibrinolysis will lead to increase in D-dimer. Consumption of platelet and coagulation bleeding will lead to diffuse bleeding. So this is the entire pathophysiology of DIC. Now, what are the obstetrical causes that we know of? So intrinsic and extrinsic. In extrinsic pathway, where there is release of tissue thromboplastin, which leads the extrinsic pathway, it could be placental abruption, which is leading to tissue plasminogen this tissue release of tissue factor. Dead fetus, molar pregnancy, all of them can lead to extrinsic pathway activation, while endothelial damage can lead to intrinsic and extrinsic pathway activation, like in preeclampsia and eclampsia. Non-specific is amniotic fluid embolism, and specific and septic abortion again will have endothelial damage plus other non-specific mechanisms. Clinical manifestations will have both. What is the baseline cause which is causing DIC, and those complications due to DIC. As I said, it's a thrombohemorrhagic disorder. So you will have both hemorrhagic manifestations and thrombotic manifestation. And worst of all, both can happen in the same organ. So like in CNS, there could be intracranial bleed along with infarcts. Renal affection could be there. Cardiovascular malformations, pulmonary malformations could be there as clinical manifestations of DIC. But most importantly, as obstetricians, we need to understand two different forms of DIC. One is an acute, rapid, excessive thrombin production leading to a hyperfibrinolytic form of DIC that we see related to obstetrical DICs, or more gradual forms where there is small amounts of thrombin being produced, like a procoagulant form of DIC, for example, septic DIC. So these two forms need to be slightly differentiated, because in this, the diagnosis also would be difficult and the treatment will vary a bit. Acute DIC will typically present as DIC with prolongation of APT, TPT, consumption and thrombocytopenia. FDP and D-dimer, as I said, the third step, the lysis is also increased. So that will also be raised. There will be schistosized on the peripheral smear, while in chronic DIC, because it is a slow onset thing, there will be a highly variable pattern. Prolonged PT is more sensitive than APTT, and there is overcompensated production of platelet with a normalized APTT. So how do you make a diagnosis of DIC? So first of all, it is a clinical lab diagnosis. There is no diagnosis of DIC without a clinical suspicion. With a predisposition, we need a lab evidence, which is a low platelet count, a prolonged PT APTT, a low fibrinogen, and a raised D dimer. So this is a classical evidence of DIC with no other background etiology of DIC. So as I said, there is markedly decreased platelet count, increased FDPs, fragmented RBCs, and in terms of coagulation factors, if we are able to do to that level, there is low fibrinogen, procoagulant factors are decreased, and there is prolonged PT, APTT, and even thrombin time. So fibrinogen is less than 200, and thromboelastography. So I will come to it about it. So this is something which is new, and I would like to mention that today in my lecture, because we have started managing patients based on the thromboelastography. So I will give you an example today, because this is something which is coming up, and these are point of care tests. These are bedside tests which are available for management and diagnosis and management of DIC. Now this is an algorithm for diagnosis of DIC. This is given by the ISTH. Can I request people to mute their mics, please? Thank you. So, is there an underlying disorder known to be associated with DIC? So that is the step one, because as I said, first there has to be a clinical indication or an association. Then we have the platelet count, which is either more than 1 lakh or less than 1 lakh or less than 50,000. Once it is less than 50,000, the score becomes 2. Then if the D dimer is increased, if it is increased, the score becomes E. Is the prothrombin time increased? If it is more than 6 seconds, then it is 2. And what is the fibrinogen level? If the level is less than 1, then the score becomes 1. I must tell you that there is a modified ISTH score in obstetrics. May I please request the audience to mute their mics?
Vikrant, please mute everyone.
Yeah, thank you. So, so in this case, so there is a modified ISTH scoring, which actually tells us, which has modified the score according to obstetrical condition, because these values are a little different in obstetrics if you go by that. So these are the various other criteria which are used apart from the ISTH criteria. Now we have to understand one thing here, although this looks very, very complicated and you would be wondering, why are we even using this score? Now, if a patient is bleeding excessively, the only thing that we want to know is that in a background of excessive bleeding, if the PT and APTT are deranged, we should take it as DIC and treat it. But in a patient who's having a low-grade sepsis and we are not able to understand what is happening, so in those situations, these criteria do come in very useful to differentiate them from the other background situations that might be happening. So we need to understand, where do we have to use these diagnostic criteria? Because in obstetrics, blood loss coagulopathy is a completely different ballgame altogether. While post-sepsis, as I discussed before, 2 types of DIC, the chronic DIC. So these are the situations where we would need these diagnostic criteria to understand that if there is DIC. So thrombocytopenia, increase in D dimers, low fibrinogen, and prolonged prothrombin time. These are the diagnostic criteria used for DICs. Now, differential diagnosis. So if you talk about the differential diagnosis, so DIC, platelet, prothrombin, time, APTT, and fibrinogen. All of them, fibrinogen is decreased, both PT and APTT are prolonged. While if you suspect any other hemolytic disorders, only platelet count is decreased while the rest are normal. While in ITP, only platelet count is decreased, rest everything else is normal. In cirrhosis of liver, because all the coagulation factors are made in liver, again platelet count is low, and all the coagulation background is going to be there. Coagulation abnormality will happen. But of course, you know that the background cirrhosis will be completely different from a background of DIC. So this is something that you have to see with relation to the clinical background and not just see the lab tests. So DIC has to be seen with the clinical background in picture. Now coming to the management of DIC. Most management measures are not based on high level evidence, but most importantly, manage the underlying condition. Is there any role of anticoagulant therapy, modulation of hyperfibrinolytic response, and supportive care? So that would be the basic principles of treating DIC. Identify and treat the underlying condition and provide supportive care. Now, most importantly, in a bleeding pregnant patient, there are 4 parts that we need to understand. Maintain euvolemia, replace blood volume, normalize tissue oxygen by replacing blood, resolve acidosis by giving adequate bicarb, and resolve coagulopathy. So this is the basic management of a bleeding pregnant patient. As we all know, notify anesthetic staff, notify transfusion service, establish intravenous access, and and notify the neonatal service. Assess blood loss. So simple thing to assess blood loss is provisional diagnosis of hemodynamic instability in non-anesthetized patient would be a systolic blood pressure of less than 100 and a pulse of more than 100 would indicate that the patient is not stable. So this is a very simple thing that we should see. If the systolic blood pressure is 90 and the pulse is more than 100, then we should be really, really cautious and start our resuscitative measures very aggressively. The urine output less than 30 ml per hour. Then maintain oxygenation and perfusion. Arterial oxygen saturation should be maintained above 95 and mechanical ventilation if necessary. We have to remember the lethal quad, which is the ACHE, acidosis, coagulopathy, hypothermia, and electrolyte abnormalities, and it needs to be managed with the help of our anesthetic colleagues. Now comes the most important part, which is the massive transfusion protocol. Now, we understand that when we are managing our low-risk cases, we might not come across these situations very often. But as we know, postpartum hemorrhage can happen anytime to anybody. So when we are replacing blood, platelet, and coagulation factors, just remember the MTP or the massive transfusion protocol, which is 1:1:1. So the moment the patient requires anything more than 4 packets of blood cells, red blood cells, the ratio should be 1:1:1. So recognize blood loss and trigger massive transfusion protocol. Take the baseline samples of CBC, clotting screen, ABG blood group, optimize intrinsic coagulation, avoid hypothermia, use tranexamic acid, use O negative until patient's blood group is known, and again MTP pack of 1:1:1. Now, if there is continued bleeding until lab results are available, we need to repeat MTP. And then if the lab results are available, give components guided by lab value. So initially, we need to monitor every 1 hour as required. What should be our aim? Temperature should be maintained, pH, no acidosis, base excess should be less than -6, lactate should be maintained at less than 4 millimole, calcium more than 1, and PT less than 1.5, INR less than 1.5, and fibrinogen more than 1. So these are our targets to maintain when a patient is bleeding actively to prevent the patient going into DIC. So these are our targets, which is very, very important when we are going to maintain our patient who's bleeding. Now, these are some of the recommendations and guidelines for management of coagulopathy associated with postpartum hemorrhage from the ISTH Society. Now, if the laboratory tests of hemostasis are normal, then FFP is not required. However, if PPH is ongoing, then 15 ml per kg of FFP should be infused. If no coagulation results are available, suppose we are in a setup where immediately PT and APTT are not available, and according to your judgment, you have given 4 units of RBCs. If you have given 4 units of RBCs, you will cause dilutional coagulopathy. So 4 units of FFP should be infused at the same time, even if the hemostatic test results are not known. And FFP should not be used before hemostatics available tests are available in PPH caused by trauma or uterine atony until 4 units of RBCs have been infused. So if you've given 1 or 2 units of RBCs, you can wait for the test results of coagulation before infusing FFP. So as you would know, everything has its own pros and cons. So over transfusion also should be avoided. So however, if there is placental abruption, amniotic fluid embolism, or you might think that there is unrecognized PPH and the blood loss is more than what you think, then in that case, FFP may be justified. So recognition of shock is one of the most important aspects of prevention of DIC. And the more you replace, the earlier you replace, we can manage these patients better. This is a very common confusion that we have, that how does FFP differ from cryoprecipitate? Now, FFP has multiple clotting factors for treatment of DIC, and the dose is usually 10 to 15 ml per kg, and we give it, as you say, with the massive transfusion protocol once you have given more than 4 units of RBCs, or if the PT-APTT is deranged. In that situation, you will give FFP. Cryoprecipitate is specifically, it has a content which is fibrinogen and also factor 8. So it is more for those indications, and especially when you think in DIC, the fibrinogen levels you want to maintain, and those are very low. So cryo would be a better option. But honestly speaking, cryo is not as easily available as FFP. So we have to manage accordingly. Fibrinogen level is a very good indicator. If it is available to monitor, it should, and any level which is less than 300 should trigger a replacement of fibrinogen, which in this case would be by giving a cryoprecipitate. So transfusion targets, once again, hemoglobin should be more than 7, platelet count should be more than 50, fibrinogen should be more than 300, and PT and APTT should be less than 1.5. And lab studies should be initially done every 30 minutes, at least 1 hourly. Should be repeated till these levels are reached and we know that the bleeding has stopped. So this is how, if we manage a bleeding patient, we can prevent a coagulopathy. So I will just present this case here just to give an example. This patient is still admitted with us in the hospital. She was a 25-year-old, para-1 live 1. She came on day 42 of a cesarean section. She was almost out of her postpartum period, but she kept on bleeding. She had recurrent bleeding. And such heavy bouts of bleeding that she was requiring blood transfusion at every bout. So she had like almost 2 to 3 bouts of bleeding, out of which 2 bouts she required blood transfusion. She was being worked up for endometritis, AVM, RPOC. When we got the MRI done, if you look here, so this was the scar. This was the scar area, and the area over the scar was hardly 3 to 4 mm. So this was something which we thought was uterine niche. Right, so this is what we were thinking, isthmocele or uterine niche, and so she was admitted one day. The next day morning, we got the MRI done, and in the evening, massive heavy bleeding in the ward in the night, and she collapsed. So she lost, like within few minutes, she lost so much blood, and she was immediately taken up for a laparotomy. She had hemoperitoneum. The scar had given way. There was a scar dehiscence. So massive transfusion protocol was initiated. We did a hysterectomy. Now, this was an unusual case, definitely. But why I have actually put this case here is that in addition to the case being a very unusual on the cause of such a heavy bleeding at 42 days postpartum, it being a uterine scar niche and hemoperitoneum and scar dehiscence and massive blood loss and massive transfusion protocol being initiated, what we did in the postpartum period was monitor her coagulation profile by a thromboelastography. Now, in thromboelastography, what we normally do is that it shows the first part is the R, which should tell us that there is initiation of the fibrin clot. The second part tells us that the kinetics of the clot formation. So the shape of the curve will tell us, and the angle alpha will tell us that, okay, the kinetics have formed. The amplitude will tell us the strength of the clot, and the curve which is coming down will tell us that, okay, the lysis has started. So this is thromboelastography, which is a bedside test, which is now available with us in the ICU and some of the gastro department also. So this particular line tells us that the clot has not formed at all. So in a patient who's in DIC, there will be no clot formation. So complete profound coagulopathy. In this case, the line is flat, the alpha is flat. So this will tell us that, and the amplitude is also narrow. So there is coagulopathy, which is evident. So there is a problem in the coagulation. Now in our patient, however, this angle was actually quite immediately starting. The R was actually decreased. The alpha angle was increased. So this was actually a hyperthrombotic and hypercoagulation state, possibly increased fibrinolysis. So this was like a prothrombotic DIC. So following this, they also said that probably this is sometimes happens like a prothrombotic DIC. This patient was in sepsis for a long time. So this gave us an indication. So we put the patient on antibiotics and gradually her coagulation profile also resolved. So this is a new investigation which we use. So I thought we should bring it up that more and more this thing can be used in our practice for correcting the condition. So depending on the shape of the graph, we can actually give what coagulation profile is not there and what we can actually give. So we need to manage the underlying condition because it is always secondary to an underlying process. Appropriate management of the primary condition is paramount. Inadequate treatment of the DIC initiating process can lead to complicated pathophysiological condition. Now, the most difficult part is when to deliver. Cesarean is indicated if the hemodynamic instability from the ongoing brisk bleeding persists despite vigorous transfusion, if the mother is endangered by a vaginal delivery, and cesarean delivery may be indicated if prompt delivery has the potential to reduce fetal morbidity and mortality. Like in severe abruption, patient is not anywhere near delivery and you need to deliver her. So in that situation, maybe you would want to go for a cesarean delivery. However, at the same time, we understand that it is desirable to correct or improve clotting abnormality prior to cesarean delivery. But a delay in operative intervention could lead to worsening of coagulopathy. So I understand that all of us are in a situation where sometimes we cannot delay the cesarean section. However, if we have to perform the cesarean section like we have done so many times, we need to get adequate blood, FFP, platelet in the operating room and administer FFP and platelet before we start the transfusion without waiting for the results of the lab studies. Is there any role of anticoagulant therapy? Heparin has been used historically for treatment of DICs. Low molecular weight heparin is preferred in high-risk bleeding, dialysis-dependent renal failure where unfractionated heparin is preferred. But other uncoagulate concentrates trialed until recently include antithrombin, activated protein C, and soluble thrombomodulin. So anticoagulant therapy has a role in the procoagulant forms of DIC or a septic DIC where we feel that, the procoagulant thing is more active. So CRASH-2 trial in early phase, such an antifibrinolytic agent like tranexamic acid is useful to form a cross-link clot. However, due to lack of evidence for benefits against thrombotic risk, it is preferable not to repeat the dose of antifibrinolytics. So again, use TEG for monitoring to see what is the state of coagulation. So this is my final slide, which talks about the diagnosis and management. So first understand if there is acute PPH, there is placental abruption, preeclampsia or HELP, is there retained stillbirth, sepsis, AFLP, AFE. So these are some of the common things which are associated with DIC. If there are associated background risk factors, then are there clinical signs, thrombohemorrhagic signs of DIC? Then we need to institute prompt treatment, including delivery, administration of blood products, treatment of underlying cause, and repeated lab monitoring with a multidisciplinary approach. If, however, there are no clinical signs of DIC, then as we saw, you do the ISTH scoring, apply DIC score, consider the point of care tests like the TEG, and if they are high risk for DIC, consult a multidisciplinary team, consider early administrative blood products and supportive measures, and then close clinical surveillance and lab surveillance. So with time, the coagulation profile will come back to normal if we are treating the primary condition. If, however, it is low risk for DIC, just close clinical surveillance and lab. So for procoagulant, we need to give tranexamic acid and blood support. For hyperfibrinolytic, but for procoagulant, just monitor blood test and give low molecular weight heparin if there is some evidence to say that there is a role of low molecular weight heparin. So the practical points are that it is a clinical lab diagnosis without a clinical basis. Let us not make a diagnosis of DIC just based on lab reports. It is always secondary to an underlying cause. Lab markers in isolation and single set of values are not helpful. Thrombocytopenia is the commonest lab diagnostic feature of DIC. Downward trend is more important than one single absolute value. It may be associated with platelet dysfunction, and PT-APTT may be normal in up to 50% cases of DIC. Severe hypofibrogenemia is very rare in DIC, so we need to rely more on thrombocytopenia and PT-APTT to make a diagnosis of DIC. So I think that is all I would like to talk about DIC. Thank you very much.
That was wonderful, Dr. Aparna. Dr. Sharda ma'am, Dr. Meenakshi, your expert comments, please. Dr. Mitra.
I have also joined.
Oh yes, good evening, Doctor. Waiting for you. Good evening. Yes.
Can I make a comment here?
Please do.
First of all, I think it is one of a wonderful lecture by Dr. Aparna, because it included everything and very good practical points also in a very short time. One thing I just want to tell about the thromboelastography, which she mentioned. Now, in my opinion, it is a quite a useful instrument, because we do not have any method of measuring. You can tell the platelet whether they are decreased or not, but you cannot tell whether the functionality is all right or not. Sometimes what happens, the platelets are normal, but they are not functioning normally. There the thromboelastography will be useful. Then the strength of the clot and the fibrinolysis, how much is fibrinolysis, that also can be measured by the thromboelastography. And this instrument is there for the last many years actually, and at Sanjay Gandhi we tried to procure this, but the central committee rejected it because it's a peripheral hospital. So it is there in GB Pant Hospital, and where surgeries are done, and this, in my opinion, it's quite a useful instrument. Because APTT and PT, they will not tell you anything about the platelet function or clot retraction or the fibrinolysis.
Agree, sir. Thank you so much. I think very, very valid. It is something that we all need to start understanding as a new test and use it more often in management of DICs.
Before Madam's final comments, can I make I would like to say two sentences. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, madam.
Because ma'am, you compile it. I'll just say two things. Number one, my expert comment is that Aparna should be giving this lecture at a very good frequency. So it's a very, very comprehensive revision of a very important topic. Secondly, ma'am, if you will remember, when we were doing post-graduation, we used to do a bedside test of clot observation and retraction. So, I mean, like, that was also very simplistic, but it used to tell us the clot and the lysis just by looking at the timing. It clots and then it retracts, what percentage the clot retracts. So that was very basic, but I'm glad that Aparna and Dr. Kishore have told us about thromboelastography. Thank you so much.
Dr. Jyoti, you wish to make any comment?
Just say yes, it is a very scary.
Little louder.
It's a very scary and a very chilly topic, because I can never forget, I lost one of my batchmates, the MBBS batchmate, who delivered a vaginal delivery. She had PPH, and on second day she went into DIC and she never came back home. So जब भी DIC होता है तो मुझे उसकी याद बहुत आती है, and I feel very, very bad about it. It's not only death is coming, we have seen death by DIC. And Aparna's lecture was just excellent. Not only the content part, the slides were beautiful. The brick in the cement part, to understand the normal physiology, I think nobody can forget if we just remember the brick and the cement. And these visuals give you a lifelong impression. And she has covered everything very beautifully. And we have to be very alert. It is just we need to have that kind of mindset. जैसे हम बोलते हैं ना प्लेसेंटा एक्रीटा mindedness होना चाहिए, वैसे ही DIC mindedness होना चाहिए. And we have to be aggressive in our approach. We cannot waste even a second in deciding what is to be done even at 1 o'clock in the night. Thank you, Aparna, for being with us.
Thank you, ma'am.
I will just make a comment which I feel very strongly. See, the question is, it is definitely a clinical lab diagnosis. 90% of us who are working in the periphery, other than the major institutions, lab is falters. Just now, Dr. Saxena mentioned that earlier, whenever a patient, obstetric patient bleeds, we always said that you should be DIC-minded person. In just minutes, things happen that she starts pouring out. I would like Dr. Aparna to think about those 90% people that the patient is pouring. She finds an uterus is, say in case of delivery, the uterus is well contracted and things like that. Situations like a PET and other things. So in those cases where you find very readily, now you find, reasonable lab, you'll find PT, APTT and D-dimer, ये सब मिल जाएंगे. आधे घंटे में मिल जाएंगे ये नहीं, ये तो मुझे लगता है कि थोड़ा सा मुश्किल है. मैं आपको यहाँ के 100 बेडेड अस्पताल की बात करती हूँ, नहीं मिलते. तो आप मुझे उस 90% को बात में रखकर आपने मुझे बताना है कि कैसे लोगों को मैनेज करना है. ये मैं थोड़ा सा समझ चाहती हूँ. See, the question is, we are not learning theory. We just want to know from the 90% point of view, what is your things? Clinically, there she's making up mind. The blood is not clotting. She's doing a bedside test. Everything is okay. The earliest you can get to know PT and APTT. Beside this, more than this, थोड़ा time लगता है. आप इस चीज में क्या बोलोगे? What should be the therapy point of view from this particular patient? मतलब इसको gynecologist को A, B, C, D क्या करना चाहिए? उसके बारे में बताएंगे आप थोड़ा सा practical. The person who is sitting in the top institution of the country will not be able to do it. What is your situation in a 5-bedded hospital? आप उस point of view से मुझको बताइए कि how she should be able to do, fix this particular patient so the life is not lost.
मैम आप बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हैं. The thing is that ये जो टेस्ट बताने का आइडिया था कि ये एक नया टेस्ट है.
मैंने उसके टेस्ट के बारे में बिल्कुल नहीं किया. I think it's opening up. It cleared the whole thing. If the graph is flat, it means she's not coagulating. If the graph takes angles, it is not coagulating. The lady who's died, it has made things very, very clear. The diagnosis is very clear to the clinician. But वो तो आएगा ही नहीं. चलो उसकी तो बात छोड़ोगे अभी. But हमें ये बताइए जो 90% लोग हैं वो कैसे मैनेज करेंगे?
मैम बिल्कुल सही है. सबसे पहले तो मतलब जैसे हम ये बोलते हैं कि अगर blood loss assessment, I think that's the first thing. And once we have given, if any situation as an obstetrician, we have required to give 4 units of blood transfusion. It should be accompanied by 4 units of FFPs and 4 units of platelets. So I think that is your number one protocol in life कि आपने massive transfusion protocol आपने दे दिया है. और अगर इसके बाद भी patient bleed कर रहा है, if at the end of you have given one round of massive transfusion protocol, and if the patient is still bleeding, then you initiate a second round of massive transfusion protocol till the time that you get your tests. There is no confusion on it. If you give RBCs without giving FFPs or platelets, you will cause dilutional coagulopathy.
Absolutely. I think you make it very clear that, before pumping the blood, you must give FFP and the platelets. That part is very clear and that is doable. That is doable.
Bilkul.
Dr. Meenakshi, you want to speak something, Dr. Meenakshi?
In this regard, I just want to say, when such a patient comes and you think that she's bleeding very heavily and you might require an MTP, immediately alert the labs and the blood bank कि हमें और मतलब हम क्या करते हैं, blood arrange कराया 1 unit या 2 units कराया, but उनको जो बताइए we will require 6 units. मतलब उसी टाइम उनको alert कर दीजिए so that they can save that blood and keep it there so that we do not waste time कि दोबारा मतलब arrange मतलब उसी time हमें मतलब we should do that. I
Yes,
think.
sir.
डॉक्टर साहब पैक्सल तो मिल जाता है, एफएफपी और प्लेटलेट्स की बात
वही तो मैंने उस टाइम पहले उनको बता के रखो कि
के लिए
हमें
आपको
और
अलर्ट
चाहिए
करना
होगा।
पड़ता
हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
बिल्कुल.
Dr. Ahuja, you manage a center where 65 gynecologists come and deliver their patients. What is your take on it?
I agree, ma'am, that, the blood, at least we see that whenever a patient, because this can happen with any patient at all. So whenever the patient walks in, the first thing is a cross match, and the blood grouping is most important, and the blood availability is found out for every patient. And the minute any patient bleeds, to know how much blood we have, how much can be made available, and again the FFPs and all to be arranged is extremely important. So I think this is forearmed is forewarned. If you're not forearmed, you are stuck in a bad soup, and it's between saving and losing a patient.
मैम और 2 पॉइंट में और ऐड करना चाहूंगी दैट मतलब आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट पीपीएच हियर, डेफिनेटली नॉट, दिस इज नॉट द फोरम, बट द पॉइंट हियर इज दैट बाय ऑल मींस the only thing is prevention. Stop the blood loss, go for hysterectomy. Let us not try conservative management.
Yes.
We have suffered so much by trying to go for conservative management. So just do hysterectomy, pack the abdomen and come out and give blood products. I think that is what saves lives.
Doctor, as a legal expert, both at the Delhi Medical Council and the Medical Council of India, I only say this. अरे यार तुमको क्यों बनाया हमने गायनेकोलॉजिस्ट, तुमको हिस्टेक्टमी नहीं करनी आई? किसने बोला है कि इसका यूट्रस बचाओ जब मर गई है पेशेंट? आई ऑलवेज से यू हैव टू सेव लाइफ. आई लॉस्ट माय मदर एट द एज ऑफ 6 years and I can never forget. Life is very, very important. And I think internal ligation की बात करते हैं, I always tell them forget about it. आपको सब टोटल हिस्टेक्टमी करनी आनी चाहिए. एक बार आप यूट्रस निकाल दो तो पैक करोगे, बच जाएगी, आप उसको करोगे तो अपना तो काम खत्म करो, उसके बाद हेल्प लेना. And I'm talking the plight of a 95% patients who deliver in 5-bedded hospital, 4-bedded hospital. आप अभी डिलीवर किया, सब कुछ आपने किया, पेशेंट फटाफट ब्लीड कर रही है. वो तो डॉक्टर सीनियर नर्सेज होती हैं, 1-2 डॉक्टर्स होते हैं, उनको एक बार इफ यू आर ऑब्सेस्ड विद DIC, आपको ये पता होना चाहिए ब्लड तो मिलेगा भैया, इसको हमें FFP और हमें प्लेटलेट्स चाहिए, और वो एक राउंड हो जाएगा तब तक आपकी इन्वेस्टिगेशन आ जाती है. सो दिस इज व्हाट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इज दैट वंस राउंड इज 111 is over, then you have to have a lab investigation by that time, assess your patient, and then go on for the second day. And by that time, everybody is alert, and shifting is also at that particular time possible. And that crux, 100, pulse more than 100, BP less than 100, you should always watch out. Always watch out. I think DIC is one thing, that people should keep repeating it. No point to be having a theory. आप अपने प्रैक्टिकल पेशेंट के ऊपर बात करो, मैं क्या करूंगी, दैट इज व्हाट इज इंपॉर्टेंट. एंड देयर वी लूज द पेशेंट्स. आप सोचते ही रह जाते हो और आपकी डायग्नोसिस ना, तो पेशेंट ऊपर जाने की तैयारी हो जाती है. सो आई थिंक we will talk time and again. This particular thing has to go as a drill to this thing. Dr. Saxena, you want to make any comments, or we come to the lighter side of the CME?
No, frankly, whatever you have said, Dr. Sharda, it's very true. But also medico-legally, sometimes